Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso. We just wrapped up our interview with Sean Dempsey, avid investor and serial entrepreneur. Anthony, what was the takeaway or two you had?
I tell you, one thing that actually surprised me the most was here's a copy of his book. And if you watch this on YouTube, but I thought this was you on the cover. But it is actually Mario of one of the Mario brothers. So that to me was the biggest takeaway. One thing that I thought was very interesting, that it wasn't part of the book, but it was more of how the book came to fruition. And he was in community. He was in a group of community of fellow investors that were sharing these ideas. And one guy had said, well, what book can I read to learn more? And what I thought was interesting, when you're around people that want to learn, they want to learn. They want more resources of ways to increase their education. So that to me, I just thought that was an interesting piece. And that's why he created this book, was instead of, because there's about maybe 10 books someone should read, and he tried to kind of summarize pieces of it to kind of have like one resource for at least to start your journey. So that to me, amongst other things, there's a lot of good information in this book, but those were a couple of takeaways. What about you, Cam?
Yeah, takeaway that I had was in reading this book, I think I mentioned this in the podcast, is I think this is going to connect with the audiences because not only is he consolidating resources, but he also shares his personal experience and what he's been able to achieve. And people love being able to peek kind of behind or peel the curtains back and see what's going on, right? That's why reality TV is so popular. And this is what Sean's doing. He's kind of pulling the curtain back and saying, hey, here's the secrets of where I've gotten to in my life, and you can do it too. So it's a great piece. The second thing I'd add is, adding a book to kind of the infinite banking space is just absolutely invaluable. I remember back to when I first heard about infinite banking, which is about a day before Anthony did. And I went out and I started to try to find books about infinite banking. And at the time, there was very, very few. And so just the idea of having another book out there that approaches it from a personal point of view, I think is a huge addition to kind of the resources available for somebody wanting to learn the infinite banking concept. So again, we hope you guys enjoy this episode with Sean Dempsey. Again, he is an avid investor, serial entrepreneur. He shares a lot of his experience with you guys in today's episode. Hope you enjoy it.
Enjoy the episode.
Enjoy it more. If you're an investor or want to be an investor and you're looking to create passive income that exceeds your monthly expenses, then this is the podcast for you. Here on the Infinite Wealth Podcast, we combine the philosophies of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad along with Nelson Nash's infinite banking concept. Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso. And today we're welcoming back Sean Dempsey. Sean, welcome back, man.
Oh, it's great to be here, guys. Thank you.
Absolutely, guys. If you've been listening to our podcast, you've heard us interview Sean actually previously. He was one of the stories that we highlighted as a success or an IBC success story. He went into one of his deals, but today he's here really to kind of share one of his passion projects, one of the things that he's been working on a lot over the last little bit. And Sean, man, I can't wait to have you back and kind of dive into this project that you've been working on, man.
Yeah, man, it's great to be back, and I'm here shamelessly peddling my book. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to be on here. I think of all the guests that you've had, or at least of everyone I've heard, this book, here we go, shamelessly. But I think this book really touches on everything you guys talk about, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, it talks about passive investing. It talks about building up cash flow. It talks about avoiding college trap. It talks about all the things that I think is so critical for getting people on the right track to starting their financial future. So I look forward to talking through it with you and getting into any of the details you want to go into.
Well, our first question is, how is this book different than more typical personal finance books? And I think you already answered that.
That was good. Well, maybe about the genesis, right? It does touch on a lot of topics, but how did this come about? What led you to coming up with this idea of even starting to write a book?
Yeah. So what got me into this, frankly, so two real answers to that question. I'll start with the first one. The first one is that I think I've mentioned last time I was on this podcast, I have a good friend and mutual colleague, Tim Boyle. We were sitting in my basement again, chatting over with some whiskey in hand and talking through IBC, talking through a bunch of stuff. And we started this conversation that took place and soon I'd say organically manifested into a weekly gathering where we just would talk about these financial matters and soon became just instead of just being the two of us, it became a conversation we started inviting other people to. And so then we had 2 people there, then we had 3 people, then we had 5 people there. And we started just having these conversations about anything from financial acumen, the Fed, interest rates, IBC. We really just kind of ran the gamut. And before you know, we had 10, 15 people. And the common question became in almost every meeting was, what do we need to read to really kind of get up to where you guys are at or what you guys are talking about? And every time we'd have a new book for them. It's like, oh, I thought you said this book. And then the next time would be, oh, this is the book you need to read. Oh, you haven't read this book? What are you guys doing here? Why are you sitting here and haven't read this book yet? And so after about 4, 5, 6 meetings, it became very evident that we had a book list that was pretty extensive. It was probably I'd say at least 10 books long. And finally, someone just stood up and I God bless him for saying, he was a little rude about it, but he's like, Sean, I cannot read 10 books right now. You need to give me a single book. I'll go home and read it, and we'll meet back next week and we'll talk through this stuff. And I said, well, I can't do that. There isn't one book that really encapsulates everything we really talk about here. But it got me thinking. I'm like, you know what? There isn't that book yet, but there will be. So so that was kind of what put the seed in my mind. And I, from that point forward, I think I spent the next 4 or 5 months putting together the draft of what has now become the Investors' Work Whistles, which is basically, I'll just put it this way, it's a distillation of people much smarter and much more wise than myself. And I'm just trying to stand on the shoulder of geniuses. I try to put these contexts out there. I'm putting people like Robert Kiyosaki, George Clayson, putting people like Tom Wheelwright out there in the front and center, obviously Robert Nash. And I'm saying, read these books, but if you don't have time to read these books, here's one book that's going to break down all their concepts and put them in one place so you can really learn from and grow and enjoy the covenants of their wisdom. And so I put together this book, and it's and the reason, by the way, I should back up. So the second reason why I put together this book is the books I just mentioned. So push books like and authors like Robert Kiyosaki, Cash Flow Quadrant, Rich Dad Poor Dad, Tom Wheelwright's Tax-Free Wealth, Becoming Your Own Banker, Robert Nash. These books changed my life. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Like I was living a very mediocre, very depressed 9-to-5 existence when I got out of college. And I got into college because why? Because your parents tell you to. Why did your parents tell you to? Well, their parents told them to. And why? Because why? Because it's going to bring you into a financial acumen. It's going to bring you into financial success. Well, why is college going to do that? Well, it's going to get you a job. Well, why is a job going to do that? Well, it's going to get you security. So all these things kind of as the standard paradigm for how to achieve success. And when I read these books, and I am in this place of doing what everyone else is doing. When I say everyone, I'm saying 95% of America is doing. Getting at it, going to college, getting a job, working 9 to 5, working hard for your money, trading time for money. I was doing these things, and then when I read these books like Cash Flow Quadrant specifically and Rich Dad Poor Dad, my whole world opened up, and I was just blown away. And it allowed me to kind of take on a new path that I think everyone should take. And these, if the thing is that no one book got me there. Those are the 2 that really stand out in my mind. But I wanted something that I could put forth to everybody that's saying, like, listen, if you really want to change your life, if you want to achieve financial prosperity and financial success, here's the concepts that matter. And so I put them all into one book. And so that's a long-winded answer to why I did this. But I think it's important to say is like, my life was changed, and it's kind of like the gospel. I wanted to shout this to the rafters. What are the things that changed my life? Well, here's what they are. They're in black and white now, and they're hitting you over the head if you want to read them.
That's funny, Sean. Is this is more of a comment, not a question, but a lot of times people will ask kind of how I got involved in infinite banking. And what I tell them is once you learn infinite banking, you almost feel an obligation to share it.
Yeah.
It's not that it's, you have to share it. It's like, man, I wish I would have known this. And so you start sharing with other people that you care about. And so that's really how kind of I know our careers got started.
Well, I'll quote you guys. You say IBC isn't taught, it's caught, right? Isn't that I think you've both said that in previous, or maybe I'm thinking someone else.
No,
But
we did not come up with that. I mean, we're not, but we do say that. And that's exactly kind of what Cameron's talking about. Like it's something clicks. And then when you do hear about it, cause it's different, you do want to share about it, but Sean, on that note, how did you first hear about infinite banking and how has your thoughts changed since the first time?
yeah, this is similar to a question I think you asked last time, and I think the answer is pretty similar. So we have a mutual colleague. Again, I mentioned him earlier. So Tim Boyle likes to take credit for everything he can. I don't know if I can give him full credit for this, but he did have me to his, to that point. He did have me read "Becoming Your Own Banker" by Nelson Nash. That is the book that after I'd read Robert Kiyosaki is the one that really transformed my life, got me off the out of the rat race, or got me in the
Mhm.
track. But it was certainly Becoming Your Own Banker by Robert Nash that opened my eyes to what's possible by pouring, I would say, gasoline. I would say that's what IBC is. In a nutshell, for anyone, I don't think anyone's turning into the first time to their podcast. Everyone's always saying, for those turning in for the first time, here, let's recap everything you think, we think you should know. I hate those episodes, by the way. But I will say, for anyone who just happens to be turning in, for the first time, that Becoming Your Own Banker is, and IBC is all about how do you pour gasoline on an investment strategy. It's not a in all be all it's of itself. It is how do you turbocharge what is already going to work for you. How do you make successful already something that is doing well for you. So I think that is why IBC is so pragmatic and so successful, is that it allows you to basically turbocharge something that is already allowing you success. How would you describe it, by the way? How would I mean, that's my kind of the way I talk about it with other people, is that, again, people who think that IBC, for example, is a panacea, it's the solution to all their problems, are misunderstanding the solution. It's not a panacea. It's not something that's going to just, hey, you just do IBC and all your life is going to turn around. No, IBC, infinite banking concept, is a means, it's a process that you follow in order to turbocharge things that you're a path that you're already on.
I like to compare it to using as a rewards credit card. You're going to do this thing anyways, but by adding one extra step, you get some extra benefits. Instead of getting miles, we're getting more money through the form of uninterrupted compound interest. And Cameron likes to explain it. It's like mousse for your hair. Like if you already have then the good looking hair, you put that mousse on it and it's just going to look even better. That is good.
That is good.
The picture's worth 1,000 words. Yeah, just show a picture. If you can, petition the dictionary to put a picture of Cameron in there when you look up IBC, it's like, this is what IBC is. It manifests in, caricature form. I like that.
I like where you're going. What I'd like to do is maybe,
that's a good point. You should add a picture.
A picture of Cameron, his hair. This is with IBC. And then maybe Cameron like coming out of a pool or a shower where his hair isn't done. This is without IBC.
You guys could probably go back and forth all day. I'm going to try to get us back on track. And you talked about get better or kind of enhancing something. And that's kind of the idea that I had with your book, Sean, because I know this has taken a couple iterations, right? The book that we have is called The Investor's Warp Whistles, but I know that you've gone through some different changes. And so, man, would you like to share kind of what the name of the book is and how you came about with that?
Yeah, thanks for teeing that up, because it is a little confusing if you're not familiar. It's like, what? A lot of people see this book or see the cover, or see the title, and they don't get it. The Investor's Warp Whistles. What does that mean? So what I've done, again, I mentioned that I'm teeing up all these great men who have written these great pieces on financial freedom or financial concepts, and I put them all into one book. And so the title Investor Warp Whistles is basically a play on words on for us gamers who might go back to the Mario 3 days, when we played Nintendo. And there was something that when you play the game and you learn about these hidden cheat codes, these hidden these hidden warp whistles specifically, that you could find in various levels of the game. And it was really funny. You just come across them randomly, you come down a tunnel, or you know how to do a certain combination of keys, and get you over and above like the map at the end, and you wind up in this area where you can get this warp whistle, which is basically just this golden flute. Again, this is all 8-bit, right, or 16-bit maybe of graphics, and you'd blow on it, or supposedly, or Mario would blow on it, and it would basically catapult you from wherever you were to much further ahead in the game. And so I use that as an allegory or analogy to explain how concepts like the cash flow quadrant, the wealth pyramid, the IBC, infinite banking concept, can work as catapults to financial freedom and success. Because if you were to play every level of the game in sequence, which is what 90% of America, 90% of the world is doing, you're actually falling. You're not getting ahead. You're actually falling backwards. And so that's the reason for the name of the book, and that's the reason why I call it the Investor's Warp Whistles. Now, that said, enough criticism has come to me about the title that I am doing a rewrite. So it's just to give you some background here. So I released this myself, or I self-published in KDP, which is Amazon's service. I've published, this will actually be my third or fourth book I've self-published, and it's very difficult to self-publish. I'm not sure if you guys have ever done it. You really have to do all your own self-promotion, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those stuff, friends, family, and you'll be lucky if you sell 50, 60 copies that way. What's been really exciting about this book is right out of the gate, it's made its way through a variety of circuits, and it has sold about 400 or 500 copies, which is exciting for me.
Nice.
It's not
Cool.
life-changing, thank you, by any means. But the more important thing is the people who have read it, and I don't believe they're blowing smoke. I really don't. I've had people unsolicited come up to me and said, Sean, no joke, this book has changed my life. And they look at me, misty-eyed or whatever, and like, the only thing I wish is I had gotten it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years earlier, because I'm near retirement. I'm doing it all wrong. You showed me the error of my ways, and that really means a lot to me. And so I feel like there's something here. I don't feel like that's, again, just empty words. So I did approach an actual real publisher in the Seacoast area, which is where I live in New Hampshire. And they looked it over. They had an editor. They had they had 7 or 8 people read it, and they said, "Wow, you really got something here." And so they have agreed to publish it nationwide. It's going to have a release of something like 30 or 40,000 copies out to every single bookstore, at least in Barnes and Nobles. I'm going to be doing book tours, so I am going to be releasing this in a quote unquote real way, and with a new title. And so they did say, hey, listen, the Investor's Warp Whistles is too esoteric. No one gets it, or at least we didn't get it until we read it. So you need something that's a little more gripping. So the new title of the book is actually going to be called Financial Cheat Codes, which is a little bit more generic. Fair enough. Yeah. It doesn't actually reference Mario 3, but it will hopefully get more people's eyes on it. And it's going to have all new illustrations. The current book is largely, unfortunately, AI driven. I had a lot of artwork in that book, and it's AI. Just because I'm lazy and AI exists, and I used it. So I did hire an actual illustrator who's going through and redoing all the illustrations. So I think the new version coming out in the fall is going to be really exciting. So I'm really excited about that. But I do want to actually go back to one thing that you said and just make sure I clarify. This is not a book on infinite banking concept. This is not a book on IBC. This is a book on how to get out of the rat race. Very similar to say Rich Dad, Poor Dad or Cash Flow Quadrant. This is a Robert Kiyosaki led or driven initiative to kind of give people the blueprint to how to exit mediocrity and enter extraordinary. And I use those terms in the book, how to get an abundance mindset versus something that basically kind of leaves them in mediocrity. And so there is a number of concepts in this book that I go over that frankly are fairly controversial when you get down to it. And I think what sets this book apart, you had asked me earlier, is I'm not just giving you a bunch of concepts and then saying, no, good luck to you, hope this works for you. I'm actually beating people over the head, at least I would put it that way, with saying, hey, listen, this is the secret to success. You know, just like the gospel message, you can either take it or leave it. But I don't have any sympathy for you if you read this book and then still keep your money in a 401k or the stock market. That is on you. And I'm very direct about that and saying, like, if you are dumb enough to read this book and then go away, put it down, and still have a 401k, then you get everything you deserve when you retire and you don't have enough money to keep you alive. And again, I know that's very draconian, but I'm like, this is, if you're in your 30s, 40s, or even early 50s, this is the book to unlock passive income for you, which is so much more important than trying to just shoot for a nebulous pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is what most people do by their standard paradigm. So that's why I talk about literally in chapter 1, as I go through what most, I call it normal investing, quote unquote normal, which is 90% of America, 95%, 98% of America. Here's what they do. They go to college, they get a job, they start a 401k. Sometimes it's auto enrolled for them.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most times they're auto enrolled into a 401k. And because what, quote unquote, you'd be foolish not to have, plan for your retirement. You'd be foolish not to put money in a 401k. But my book is kind of itemizing the fact that, listen, if you do these things, you're not only taking more risk, but you're going to be setting yourself up for bigger and bigger failures down the road, because you're not allowing yourself to see the bigger picture, which is that cash flow and passive income can afford you greater wealth, greater security, greater flexibility, collateralization, all these principles that I talk about in the book, tax-free advantages that you won't have through normal paradigm. And so that's the thing that you really want to escape. And that's the thing that I really point out is, like, basically I lay it out like this. You're a moron right now. Do you want to not be a moron? Follow the advice of this book. And again, I think that sounds there's a lot of hubris in that statement, but I beat people over the head with it. And that's the reason I think this book stands out from the rest, is that I think a lot of people tiptoe around that message. They're not afraid to have the difficult conversation. They're too afraid to take this to their financial advisor and says, well, this book says that you're full of what. And I'm happy to have that conversation. I have axes to grind for sure, but I have no pony in this race. I'm like, if people want to take this message and execute it, they're going to be better for it. If they're not, then it's on them. And frankly, that's what I'm trying to get across.
Sean, I appreciate that. A lot of the stuff you're saying in there, I'm just standing here smiling because I agree 100% with it.
I know I wanted to rebuttal, but I'm like,
I'm just checking the boxes. Agree. Right. And what very well stated. And what I was going to comment is that you'd mentioned the response that you've gotten so far from somebody that will read the book, walk up and just say, hey, thank you. This really hits home with me. I think that connection is because when you do read the book, not only do you have the resources, right? Some of these books that you're referencing in there, but you also have personal experience that you outline in there. And so that's kind of the back end of that book. There's a few chapters in there where you kind of go through and highlight, your passive income report for the last couple of years. Do you mind maybe touching on that a little bit?
Thank you. I didn't even set you up for that. So there's two ways that this book is different. One is what I just described. I won't go into it again. It's kind of beating people over the head. The other way that this book is different is I don't just tell you what to do. I practice what I preach, and I give you the literal examples of that I've done over the last 24 months. Here's the managed funds I've invested in. Here's the properties I've invested in. Here's the way I've taken advantage of cost segregation studies. Here's the way I've taken advantage of tax deferral practices. Here's how I'm using the chapters that you just read. So there's 11 chapters. I call them warp whistles in this book, but there's 11 examples of how to get out of the rat race, how to create passive income, how to establish yourself in a way that allows you to achieve financial security, which we all describe. By the way, I want to pause real quick. I define financial security as when your passive income is greater than your monthly expenses. Again, everyone who's listened to your show should have that beaten over their head a million times. And it's beaten over their head in the book a million times. It literally every single chapter I bring them back to it. It's like, that's your formula. If you want this formula for success, it's this. If you want the formula for E equals MC squared, and the how light the Einstein's theory, that's this formula. This is the formula for financial success. If you believe in it, you got to execute it. And so basically, to go back to what I was saying before, I don't just talk through these warp whistles and these chapters that explain how to achieve financial success. I show you how I personally did it. And I think that that's important. I've never seen another book do that, by the way. A lot of times, even some of the great writers that I read, they'll give you a phenomenal set of things to execute on and suggestions for how to improve your life. But they don't show you, like, here is actually what I did to do. Well, I guess Nelson Nash is a example of that. He does walk through specific policies that he's implemented, but that's not really necessarily, it's just one example of a policy that he put in place. It didn't show him how he achieved financial success through that means. So I do try to take this and say, hey, listen, here's what I'm practicing and preaching, and here's how I'm following it. So I do end the book very clearly on what I've done, how I'm putting physical dollars to work, how I'm actually budgeting my own time and money, how I'm actually investing my energy and capital, and what is the actual return that I'm looking for? What is the ROI that I'm looking for? What are the financial metrics that are important to me? How is cash on cash return manifest in the deals that I'm doing? So I put that forth, and I think that is a cherry on top to reading this book that hopefully people take a lot of value out of.
Yeah, I'd say that was probably one of my favorite parts because it was so different than, and I know in the beginning you listed, I think, 10 books. They're all great books, but what made yours different is you put examples of what you're currently doing now. Sometimes we've seen it, like even in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he talks about selling Wallace, and he has a little example of him selling a business. You list quite a few of them, and maybe all of them. And you know what I liked is you even listed ones that did not turn out so well.
I did.
Because I think that's one thing we need to realize. You're not gonna hit a home run every time. You're going to strike out. I mean, we're going to have that, and I appreciate that you not only put your wins in there, but you also included the losses.
Well, I do so, by the way. I think I'll just open up the book while I'm talking through this. I put the context of how I invest through the lens of, and this is in chapter 1 of my book, the pyramid of wealth. I didn't come up with this concept, frankly. I don't know who did it. I know you guys have mentioned it. I think Wealth Without Wall Street guys have mentioned it a couple of times. I do put it to a lot more detail than I've seen elsewhere, so I will pat myself on the back on that. But the pyramid of wealth, if folks that are listening are not aware, is basically a framework for figuring out where does your wealth reside. And if you think of an actual pyramid, so a triangle, you want the majority of your wealth to reside at the bottom of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid. And I define the pyramid of wealth as having 4 different and distinct tiers. Tier 1 being cash value, life insurance, for example, liquid receivables, things that are collateralizable, things that are flexible, things that have immediate access to the value of that. And these are not necessarily, these are more actually, so tier 1 is like cash preservation assets. Then as you go up the pyramid, tier 2, tier 3, these are now investments. These are things like multifamily real estate, for example. Long and seasoned business would be in tier 2. Things that maybe you guys are putting together a very sizable amount of opportunity in the insurance side of, and by the way, just communicating the concepts of financial security. I think these are areas where your guys are making money. So anytime you have a seasoned business or anything that has been generating revenue for a long period of time, that's tier 2. Tier 3 is now where you go into areas where it's a little bit more risk. Your opportunity for collateralization goes down. but you're going to have things like managed funds up here. You're going to have things like short-term rentals up in tier 3. But you have starting to have less and less control as you move up basically the pyramid. And then at the very top, and this is where I think that most America has it backwards, tier 4, which is now no longer investment, no longer investing, you're speculating. And this is where you have zero control or no control. You have no ability to collateralize. And this is where things like your 401k, your stock market, crypto, all these assets where you have no control to actually implement any any control of the asset at that point is in tier 4. And the reason I point this out in reference to your question is that most people's pyramid is literally flipped upside down. When you think about the majority of the American investor, they have 95% of their net worth in equities. They have it in their 401k, right? They have it in their Roths. They have it in things that they have no control over or access to, for that matter, until they're 65. So this book explains how you flip that on its head, how you actually make a pyramid that is right side up. And so in the framework of how I'm investing my money, I talk through in those final chapters, or that appendix area, is here's where I'm putting 90% of my money, which most of it is in the tier 2, tier 3. But I do those occasional tier 4s where there's nothing wrong with speculating. I think speculating gets a bad rap sometimes when you hear it as a word, but that's what most people are doing. Most people are speculating when you think about it, when they're putting their money in the stock market. But I do believe that in speculation, but only with a small percentage of your money, a small percentage of your net worth. I put that number, I fix it at 15%. And so in my book, I talk about some failures. I talk about some areas where, I put some money in areas where I could have gotten some big returns, but I also have achieved some failures. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that having an open kimono to some of those events are important, especially in the framework, which is when I originally wrote this book. It was not supposed to be something I socialized to everybody. I originally wrote this book, frankly, to just be a series of articles that I would explain to like my investor community, the group that I'm in. And it's obviously morphed and gotten a lot more traction since then. But I believe that if you're going to be completely open and honest about where you're putting your money, you cannot just talk about your successes. Otherwise, you're not being honest with yourself and others. You got to explain your foibles as well, and where you've fallen on your face. Because a lot of times you learn more about from your failures than you do from your successes.
Speaking of failures, Anthony, do you have a question? No? Okay, I'll go. One of the things that you mentioned, analogies, you mentioned gaming, and the thought that came to my mind was that when people read Nelson's book, he kind of uses theater as the analogy, right? All the world's a stage, banking, right, is a play that we got to act out. Which player are you? Which actor are you? When I read your book, you talk a lot about gaming, right? And you mentioned it earlier. Can you give us maybe a little bit of that connection between the idea behind that, and then also what gaming is? You have a great chapter in your book about it.
Yeah, I have a whole chapter in my book toward the end called Gamify Your Investing. And again, the whole theme of the book, I thought it'd be important or interesting from a narrative perspective to tie it all together through talking about games. Obviously, I'm using the concept of a warp whistle from Mario 3, so gaming made sense. But the way in context here to how I use it in that chapter is I think it's important. And again, these are concepts that I didn't come up with. Again, I do want to make sure that this is very clear as I talk through my book. It's like if I was to just say I came up with all these concepts, that would be a bold-faced lie. What I am doing is taking the concepts of great financial leaders, and I'm just simply putting them on the page and distilling them in chapter form. And so when I talked about gamifying your investment, what I'm talking about is how can you track your budget, which is your monthly expenses, and your passive income, and make it into a game. So that formula that I described earlier, how do you turn your passive income greater than your monthly expenses? How can you make sure that you've achieved that goal? How do you win the game? you got to have the end in mind when you're playing a game. You can't just be endlessly playing and then not have, Mario has to be able to beat Bowser at the end. He has to rescue the princess. He has to be able to achieve a goal. And so that is the goal. When your passive income, when your PI is greater than your ME, that's when you win. And so you got to gamify that. And by gamify, again, I talked through in the chapter, you're tracking it. You're making sure that you're not just got a general pick it out of the blue, hope for the best sort of mentality. No, you're actually getting into the weeds. You're going into your statements. You're using software. You're using Excel. You're using whatever means possible to make sure that you have a good grasp of where your dollar is. Dave Ramsey calls it giving every dollar a name. Again, I don't want to cite someone like Dave, who I know we all agree on, disagree on a number of ways, but he does have really great insights when it comes to budgeting and it comes to getting out of debt. And I call him out for what he does right, and I call him out for what he does wrong in my book. But he has a great philosophy on giving every dollar a name, and that's really important on the left-hand side of that equation. The right-hand side of that equation. How do you make your passive income greater than your monthly expenses? Well, you got to know what your monthly expenses are. So gamify that, put that into practice, put it into Excel, put it into Mint. Well, Mint doesn't exist anymore. Monarch Money or whatever software makes sense for you, QuickBooks. Make sure you're tracking it daily, weekly, certainly monthly, and then going back to your monthly, your passive income, and make sure you're tracking that on a consistent basis. And if you do that in a way that makes sense for you, you're going to gamify it. You're going to make sure that when you look at the numbers, you're like, oh my gosh, look at this, honey. Our monthly income, our passive income is greater than our monthly expenses. We won the game. What are we going to do? And then you can go forth and you can plan your life and you can make it what you want it to be. When you win the game, you're out of the rat race. And that should be what every day, every morning you wake up and you just think about and you drool over and you obsess over, how do I make my passive income greater than my monthly expenses? Because that allows me to quit my job, leave the rat race, and take on a life that I'm worthy of and I'm deserving of. And that's, again, going back to what got me to write this book. That was so important for me because I was in a dead end job, in the beginning season of my life. When I exited college, I got in a job. I couldn't see a path forward. I frankly was very depressed. I was like, is this what life has for me? It's like, am I going to live and die in this job? I guess I get a house and I'm sure I'll get married. I'll have kids. I'm sure I'll do these things. These are very rewarding, but is this it? Is this really what it has? Is this the most that financial security looks like? Because this is all that I'm taught. This is what I'm preached from everyone from my grandmother down to my financial advisor. You put your money in the stock market, you hope for the best, you work hard, you don't worry about it. Just put it in our hands and everything will be fine. And I did that. I did that for several years. And then it wasn't until, again, Kiyosaki opened my eyes and he showed me that, no, there's so much more. This is not the way that people create financial freedom. It's not. And so it's through passive income. It's not through some nebulous pot of gold. It's through generational wealth. It's through allowing my children and my children's children and my children's children's children to be able to have access to a wealth of passive income that's going to be passed down from generation to generation. And that does not happen through the stock market, guys. It does not happen through the 401k. These instruments are purgatory. They're financial purgatory. And until people beat others over the head and just say, listen, you've been lied to, you've been scammed by a system that just wants to put you in your place and does not want to allow you to have any sort of freedom. This needs to be just shaken out of people. And that's, again, I don't know if this book's going to do that or not, but I want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And so that's where gamifying your investment comes from. And that's where I get to in that chapter.
Awesome.
Sean, man, great stuff. And there's even more we can talk about because you have a chapter on how to legally avoid taxes, the college trap, how to find good deals. I think we may have you back maybe when you go to do the book tour. Maybe we can dive a little deeper in some other areas. But as we're wrapping up, Sean, tell us well, for one, where people can find you in the book, but also, is there any last thing you want to add, or a question maybe we didn't ask?
I'll throw a question at you. I'll put you guys on the spot. I know I've sent you the book. You've read it. What
Yeah.
was the part of the book that most interested you? I know, again, these are concepts that I'm sure you know, preaching to the choir here. You've been talking about these things for a while. All the things in the book. That's why I think this is almost like a poster child for your podcast. When I wrote this book, I'm like, oh, Anthony and Cameron are going to eat this up, because it literally is talking about everything they talk about on a daily basis. Was there anything though that you read that was either interesting or provocative, or outside the 4x6 card of allowable opinion that you usually hear, that that you thought was worth talking about?
To me, it'd be hard to pick one, because it's almost, there's like, or you mentioned the 11 cheat codes. I mean, like, each one has its own value, and honestly, probably could even be expanded to its own book. So, as we started earlier, there's a ton of personal finance books, but most of them focus on one piece. What I liked about yours, it accumulates a bunch of different philosophies. There's books. I mean, this is more of like a Swiss Army knife of personal finance, where there's a lot of different attributes, where it's taxes, it's legacy, it's infinite banking, just so many things. It's really hard to pick one, but it was great to have one book with multiple topics, with also sources to learn more if you wanted to go deeper into the cheat codes. And I'm really glad you changed the name, the Warp Whistle. I know Cameron was big into a Game Boy. Like, even when I first met him, he still had a Game Boy, which is a whole nother story. But
He had the same hair back then, I bet.
Ooh. Actually, no.
I don't know if you've ever changed it.
Yeah,
I know you haven't changed the hair product, but it was refreshing, and a different take on financing that accumulated a lot of different aspects.
I agree with what Faso said. What I would add here is that reading your book, or let me start with Nelson's book, is that the feedback that you typically get, that I will get on Nelson's book, that's negative in any way, is that the end game for that one is to end the Fed. Right. And I don't think that connects with a lot of listeners or a lot of readers these days. I think most people are focused much more smaller, right, on their personal sphere of how do I get ahead in life. And I think this book is really going to connect mainly with our audience, or anybody else that's out there that's looking to get out of the rat race, is because the end game with this book is I got to create more passive income than my monthly expenses. And it's a step by step on how to get there and how to do that. And so I think that's where you're going to find success in this market, Sean.
Well, thank you very much. And that is the name of the game. And the reason I thought this book, I added some value to the sphere of the lexicon that was out there, is that, no, I don't have any grandiose vision like, I'll write this book and the Fed's going to end. I think that would be rather foolish. But I do feel like individuals can take control of their life. There's a lotus of control there. When you read this, if you read this book and you're still in the stock market, if you're still in the 401k after reading this book, like I said, God bless you and be well. But that, I just don't know how. I lay out every possible explanation and every possible avenue for why passive income strategy is a much better way for achieving long-term success than some nebulous goal of creating some pot of gold, which is what the current traditional wisdom is. And so again, the quote unquote normal investor, I think, is taking on significant risk. That's the other thing. That one thing I will end on here, though, is I talk to a lot of people, friends, family, etc., and they come up to me and they'll say something like, well, I have such little risk threshold, or my wife hates taking risk, and that's why I don't go into real estate. And I just look at them, doe-eyed, and I'm just like, you are doing the exact opposite then. I mean, by keeping your money in your 401k, by locking it up in financial purgatory, by taking on, by having your money in an asset class that will literally and can and will probably drop 30, 40, 50% overnight, that you have no control over, that is the risk. That is the risky option that you're taking on. What I'm suggesting of things that are very benign, like getting yourself involved in multifamily real estate, get yourself involved, which has not only tremendous tax advantages, but also tremendous flexibility and tremendous control and collateralization that you can take advantage of. Not to mention managed funds and a variety of other things that I talk about in the book. These are things that have little to no risk. If you really don't want risk, take advantage of these things. Don't put the money in the quote unquote normal investing paradigm. So again, I'm beating a dead horse, but I think that this is so important for middle America to hear, is that if you have money, let me put it this way, and I'll leave it with this. Listen, the listener, I'm talking to you now. If you have $1 in your 401k right now, and you are giving yourself every excuse in the book to keep those dollars in your 401k, read this book. If you like to understand why and how and why it's important to extricate yourself from the market and from a 401k plan that's just going to keep you down, read this book. This is the book that's going to allow you to achieve actual financial freedom for yourself, for your children, for your family, and create generational wealth from years and years to come. And again, these are not my pie in the sky ideas. These are ideas that have been tried and true from, like I said, from George Clason and Richest Man in Babylon, all the way to Robert Kiyosaki and Nelson Nash. These are great intellectuals and free thinkers and financial gurus that I am just distilling in a very practical way. So read the book, and if you still want to keep your money in 401k, then like I say, God bless you, but I have no sympathy for you when you're 90 years old and can't survive on what you have left in your nest egg. So let's put it that way.
Well, on that note, Sean, where did we talk about where we can find the book?
Well, it's on Amazon. It's on Amazon right now for the next, I'd say 6 months. You can go to Amazon, look it up, Warp Whistles, or you can just type in warpwhistles.com, and that will bring you right there. It's in hardcover, it's in paperback, it's an audiobook, and it is in Kindle format. So every way you can read a book, it is there. And I love to, drop me a line. Let me know you love it, you hate it, or anything in between. I'm open to all forms of criticism. There is going to be a new version coming out, new title, new artwork, everything, but that won't be till the fall of 2025.
Great. Well, we'll be looking forward to it.
Sean, thanks again. Really appreciate you coming in and sharing your insights with our listeners.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
Go make it a fantastic day.
Take care.
If you like this video, I know you'll like this one. And if you want to learn how investors use infinite banking to increase their returns and lower their taxes, check this out. And if you have some questions and want to see if infinite banking is for you, hop on a discovery call with us. Link for that will be in the description.